Okay, greetings and welcome. Oh, it's an odd one. Hold on, let me try that again. Gremlins from Day Dot. Um, there we go. Greetings and welcome to the Ansapo, not the Ansapo, Ligadi's Pan African Community News Network update. Today's date is the 1st of March 2026. I'm Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu in the studio with Sister Oleander. I'm hoping we'll see our Sister Oleander there. I can't see her on the screen at this particular moment in time. I can see her icon. There she is. Okay, greetings. Can you hear us okay?
Greetings. Yeah, don't know what happened there. The gremlins got me as well, I think.
Wonderful. Okay, what I'm going to do is put us both on the screen like that, or else we'll probably lose the slides. But it's good to have you with us. Sister Oleander will be monitoring the chat as usual. As ever, it's always helpful for us to have some feedback. So if you can hear us and see us okay, as you can see, the program's already started with a few gremlins, but hopefully as we go on, things will be smoothing out. So let us know that you can see us and hear us okay. She'll be monitoring the chat just to say hi, if that's it as well. I mean, it's always good for us to know that you're around. But I'm going to get started as we have a jam-packed program as ever. And we start as usual with libations, which is the remember section. And so I'm going to start with the first slide. And yes, it is working, thankfully. Okay, and the first we remember is to the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Now, many of you have known that he recently passed and joined the ancestors. He was a world-renowned civil rights leader for the African American community. He led a lifetime of crusades in the United States and abroad, advocating for those who were poor, underrepresented. And he was very much focused on issues such as voting rights, securing job opportunities, education, and healthcare. Now, in many ways, our ancestor now, it's very odd to say he's an ancestor, our ancestor now, one of his claims to fame was actually he was with our other ancestor, Martin Luther King, on April the 4th, 1968, when he was assassinated. And that kind of propelled him into the spotlight. He was already an activist in his own right at that time. But what he did following that, he didn't stop. He didn't let it deter him. He continued moving forward. He had a lot of diplomatic victories with world leaders. And much of it was done through his Rainbow Push coalition. In fact, if you're familiar with the term African American, much of that was done through his Rainbow Coalition, which pushed and championed the term African American as opposed to Negro American, Black American. He channeled cries for what we call Black pride and self-determination, and that moved into corporate boardrooms. It pressured executives to make America a more open and equitable society. And as you'll know, in the later years, despite his profound health challenges, he continued to protest against racial injustice, especially in the era of Black Lives Matter. There's so much more I can say. He ran twice for president and kind of set the template, set the ground for President Barack Obama. We remember. The next libation is to this young man who would have been 39 this February, Anthony Walker. Now, it was 20 years since he was racially abused and murdered by Michael Barton and Paul Taylor in an unprovoked attack in 2005. He was a college student. He had dreams of training as a lawyer when he was attacked. He was walking with his girlfriend to a bus stop with his cousin around 11 p.m. on the 29th of July. And they just murdered him. Now, the Anthony Walker Foundation was set up in 2006 to ensure his death did not become another statistic, but rather to have his name live on as a positive legacy. This was a time around the era Ligadi was running. I remember very much being involved in campaigns trying to secure justice for him. In these kind of situations, you can never bring him back. And it's amazing and tragic to think that it's been so long, 20 years since he joined the ancestors. We remember. The next libation is for a name that many of you will probably be familiar with, and that's Claudia Jones. Now, often when people hear the name Claudia Jones, we think about carnival, and it's very limited to just that one single window. But that's not what she was. That's not all that she was responsible for. She was a social and political activist and journalist who was active both in the United States and in the UK. Her early experience of racism in America shaped her thinking as an adult. And she often asserted that for a liberation movement to be successful, the liberation of the African worker woman was essential. So she was very much about empowering women. She was frequently credited with laying the groundwork for intersectional feminism. We hear this term associated with academics, Kimberly Crenshaw, etc. But we forget it was Claudia Jones. We forget the anti-woman speech. But Claudia Jones also helped organize the first West Indian Carnival in London. That's what it was called in 1959. And that's what grew into the Notting Hill Carnival. She also, though, and this is very important, established the West India Gazette with Amy Ashwood Garvey in 1958. And this was one of the first major British African newspapers in England. And it reported on political events in the UK, in the Caribbean, and in Africa. And it became a vehicle for expressing her views on imperialism, racism, and sexism. Many people don't know she was a communist. She wasn't ashamed of actually wanting to help as many people as possible and being anti-capitalist. And that's why she had to leave America. And so, yes, we think about the papers we have in the UK, like The Voice today, but none of the papers, even the one I used to work on, which was called The New Nation, would have existed without the works of Amy Ashwood Garvey and, of course, Claudia Jones. We remember. And another libation, unfortunately a tragic one that we have to remember, goes to our brother Malik El-Hajj Shabazz, or Malcolm Omowale X, who was assassinated on February the 21st in 1965. Now, he was given a speech at the Audubon Ballroom in Manhattan, New York City, and he was at the age of 39, a prominent civil rights leader, an advocate for Pan-Africanism. And it was at that time when he was promoting the Organization of African American Unity. He was shot multiple times by three men as he prepared to kind of like launch this revolutionary movement. Now, his wife, Betty Shabazz, and their children were present in the audience at the time of his murder. The assailants, who were later identified as Nation of Islam members, rushed the stage and opened fire, and he passed away before he was taken to the hospital. There's been much discussion about the role of the nation, the role of the FBI in the assassination of our beloved brother. That's not the space for today. This is just to remember his work, his legacy, and that he remains a powerful symbol for the struggle against racial injustice and for equality, equity in America and beyond the world, and especially for those of us who are reeling from American imperialism alongside with Israel and their breaking and flaunting of international law. We need more Malcolms in this world. And the last libation for this section is we remember it was 45 years since, on a rainy Monday, March the 2nd, 1981, when there was this unprecedented political gathering of Britons of African heritage who gathered and took, in Fordham Park in New Cross, and they assembled a few hundred meters away from the burnt out shell of 439 New Cross Road. And what happened was a day in history that we can't forget. And this is the Black People's Day of Action. Now, it's important to understand that 6 weeks earlier, and we've spoken about this, and there's been commemorative events this year, as is every year about this. We know that 13 young people were killed. It's believed to be by arson. The investigation has never been satisfactorily resolved. But we do know there was governmental indifference, institutional apathy, there was police incompetence, as well as an active hostility from the press and the media. We know that at that time, our buildings and our shops and our homes were being firebombed, and yet when these 13 young people were murdered, nothing was said. And so the Black People's Day of Action was, I don't know, I don't want to say revolutionary, because what it was a groundbreaking sort of organization by the New Cross Massacre Action Committee, which was chaired by the activist, poet, and publisher John LaRose. And there were many others, Dark as How and so forth, who would be involved in organizing this amazing kind of like a march, which moved throughout from South London to the House of Parliament. I think they went to Fleet Street, and the demonstration was called for on an ordinary working day rather than a weekend. It was meant to disrupt the days when protests actually meant protests, when it was disruptive, when it was civil disobedient. The route followed, went through the Thames and went through Blackfriars. I think it went up to Fleet Street. I think the Sun came up with this headline. What was it? The day the blacks ran riot, I think was the headline. There was an event on Saturday. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it, organized by Black History Walks. And I know Tony's taking care of this, Tony Warner. Then you'd have probably got all the facts and all the details in there. It was an amazing feat of activism, and it really changed the course of how we in this country. And I say that because 45 years on, when we look back at what's happened since then, we all recognize that the year 1981 was an amazing pivot for our organization and our ability to push back against the entrenched Afrophobia and racism that we was experiencing. And this is when the uprisings took place. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that I was on the march for this, and I remember distinctly walking through Fleet Street, and the press were all leaning out of their windows, screaming all kinds of profanities at us. Remember, we're all young, we're like 15, 16 years old, and some adults as well, I guess. And yeah, they were spitting at us. It was just really damn disgusting. But yeah, I just wanted to reflect. I do remember being there.
No, thank you for sharing that. And there was a film by Menelik Shabazz. It's on the Burning Illusion DVD. Well, we don't have DVDs now, but it's called Blood Eagle Run. And it captures some of the activities of young people like yourself who were there at the time, standing up, for our rights. I mean, and this is what I really love about this. This wasn't kind of like just one of those symbolic tokenism marches. This was something which really demonstrated our anger. This was a generational, crossed from young people to elders who were here. There was 25,000 people in this march. I know nowadays people talk about 100,000 stuff, but this was unheard of in this time. And it really shaped the nation. This is when we start hearing about race relations and laws and the Commission for Racial Equality. All these things started to happen because the state was petrified that we would respond and we did. In 1981, we did respond to say, you cannot burn our children in our homes. You cannot engage in sus and stop our elders on the streets. So yes, thank you, Sister Oleander. Okay, so that's the last libation. You are watching the Pan-African Community News Update. If you're with us live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook or YouTube. The chat is active. Sister Oleander's here in the studio, so if you want to give us a heads up to let us know you can hear us and see us okay, that'll be fantastic. Any comments and stuff, that's always useful. As usual, don't forget to subscribe, like, share, all that sort of stuff, that social media stuff. I'm all for that. If you find this broadcast useful. But in the next section, we're going to go through the general domestic news affecting our community over the past couple of weeks. And I'm going to start off with, okay, the story. Okay. I say the story, there's obviously many stories, but the one that's been covered in the media quite a lot is this year's BAFTA ceremony, which was rocked after the N-word was shouted at actors Oleander and Michael B. Jordan. And this happened a week ago. I was actually watching on TV when it happened. It was like going backwards in time. He's like, I couldn't have heard what I heard, and it happened again. This is, we know a bit more since then. We know a little bit more what's happened. We know that the N-word was uttered by the Tourette's campaigner, John Davison. And Tourette's is this involuntary disorder where you kind of like come out with these things out of your control. And so, he said it at least 3 times, not just at Oleander, and Michael B. Jordan, but also at the production designer, Hannah Beachler. And now that people know that, there's a sense of, okay, we're not, saying that he was particularly being racist, but that's not the end of the story, because there's a couple of things, a couple of failures that really hurt, that really get to us. The first thing is that everyone who was watching that live being broadcast, the fact that it wasn't edited out, that insult wasn't, that's the first thing. And the reason why that's a big issue is because normally the BBC have had like a 10-minute delay or 60-second delay on live broadcasts. And what they do is something happens, they quickly hit the button and it terminates, and that's it. And they keep going until the things happen and they come back up. And over the last couple of years, since the genocide in Gaza, what they've done is actually increase the length. And so the BAFTAs was actually on a 2-hour delay. And so they had ample time to catch those words and edit it out. But someone consciously decided to keep them in. Now you might say, well, maybe that person wasn't really paying much attention, or that team, because it wouldn't be an individual, that team wasn't paying much attention. Well, the problem for that is that we know that the BBC actually edited out words that were talking about Palestine. So there were other issues that the BBC didn't want to be aired, and they edit them out. But when it came to the N-word, they were cool with it. So what we are seeing here is a conscious decision to edit out words that they found uncomfortable, political reasons, but not those which were abusive. And then when I say that there are multiple layers towards this, not just all aimed at John Davidson, there was also a failure of the BAFTA to not only provide care for Davidson with Tourette's for his outbursts. Okay, that, I get that he's got this disability, but also for our brothers Oleander and Michael B. Jordan. They're here doing a professional job, and they're being insulted on an international stage live around the world. And so, yeah, there was some apology, mealy mouth thing that came out and didn't really address the issue and didn't talk about the offensiveness of this. But this is kind of like what took place. And this is, I won't say disappointing, because it makes us angry. It makes me angry that this is still happening in 2026. Now, the BBC have launched an investigation, and of course, the Culture Secretary, Lisa Nandy, has said it was completely unacceptable and harmful, blah, blah, blah. But it's all after the event. What happened is that we saw kind of like what their response was in the immediate aftermath. And that response tells us they didn't give a damn. It didn't matter that, these brothers had been at the top of their game, major success with the film Sinners. Okay, they were presenting, they were, there's nothing, they didn't care. They could have been anyone. They didn't care. They just did not think about protecting their well-being and actually coming out and saying, you know what, you hear what? It's like, hands up. We should have dealt with that straight away. Even now, we haven't really had an issue. I mean, I've made a formal complaint through Legali, but this is a situation here. But we'll come back onto this topic, because unfortunately, it doesn't just stop there. And when I say that, we also know that that's the BBC. On the ITV, we saw that the director, Akinola Davis Jr., who won Outstanding Debut for his film My Father's Shadow, was speaking on ITV. He was making his awards, and once again, while the footage was being aired, no, it was him. It was at the BAFTA. So while it was being aired, he said, for Nigeria, for London, for Congo, Sudan, and then Free Palestine. And they cut that all out. Now, you've got to imagine what it means that you keep the N-word, but you cut out the words for Nigeria, for London, the Congo, Sudan, Free Palestine. What's going on in your head where the N-word, which is the most toxic, dehumanizing, Afrophobic word used to describe African people, in your mind is the most palatable option than just the words for Nigeria, for London, the Congo, Sudan, and Free Palestine? And let's be clear, it's the Free Palestine part that they were focused on. They don't give a damn about Congo. They don't give a damn about Sudan. They don't give a damn about Nigeria. And they could barely give a damn about London. And so even though the audience at the time when he said that gave him a round of applause, that was not broadcast out. So this is a sort of thing that's taking place in 2026. And this is why I say we're going to return to this topic, because we know that this is kind of like the symbolic side, not the political side, but we have to deal with the symbolic side, because if we allow the normalization of the N word to return, then all of a sudden it's like it comes back into our schools, into the reading literature, it comes back on our programs, into our media, and it's a slippery slope. I'm going to move on. I'm going to return to a story, and I'm going to be very careful how I frame this one, because as a program, we always tell you what's happening, but we've got to be careful. We don't do wrong and strong. And so this is a story we received. This one is about, it builds up on the pilot that was closed at the Royal London Hospital's sickle cell patients emergency care day unit, and many patients were upset about that. And since then, what's happened is that some patients, and you can see in the image Cheryl Hilton, who received some really bad care. She said that she was left in a corridor without privacy, without dignity. Her cubicle was freezing. They had air conditioning blowing down on her, which really exacerbated the condition. And she's saying clearly that, look, I didn't get pain relief when I was supposed to. I think they forgot about me. It left her hospitalized for 2 weeks because they let things get worse, because there wasn't an emergency daycare unit. And these are legitimate concerns. Okay. And so that's what we're sharing here. I don't want to conflate that with the issue about whether the emergency daycare unit is going to come back, if it was right to shut it or not, because I think we've talked about that in the past before, and it's not as cut and dry as everyone seems to think. It's like I can say myself and Oleander used the Royal London sickle care unit, and we know how much effort's put into that work, and we know the struggles to get the funding to keep the program open. So it's not as simple as that, but that's not to excuse that her experience was below the standard that anyone should expect. And so these are two things going at the same time. It's like that has to be improved, and of course that would be improved if there was this emergency care unit which ran 24/7, 365 days of the year. But we're sharing the news. Perhaps we'll come back to explain, if it comes back again, the bigger issue about the emergency care day unit. The next story is one that's following on from something we've been reporting about, and this is it's not investigation, the inquiry into spike ops and into policing, British policing. Maybe this is in the wrong section, but essentially what's happened is that there's been testimony from a former Daily Mail reporter, and this is about allegations that he ordered a private investigator to deceive Stephen Lawrence's mother, and he's saying that actually that's not true. And he's completely devastated that people are saying that. Now, this guy, Stephen Wright, helped lead the newspaper's long-running campaign over the murder of Stephen Lawrence. He's one of the journalists who's now accused of using private investigators to use unlawful methods to secure stories. We also know that the police were engaged in trying to undermine the campaign for justice for Stephen. But this claim forms part of a legal action brought by our sister Toyin Lawrence, who you can see on screen, and 6 other people against Associated Newspapers Limited, which is what publishes the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. It's an ongoing case. The High Court has been played a recording of private investigator Christine Hart, in which she says 100% blagged information from Lawrence on Wright's orders by pretending to be a journalist from The Guardian. And so, this is where the tension's coming up. So you're having private investigators who are saying that he's the one who told me to try and get information any way possible. And she lied. She pretended she was on a paper that's sympathetic. And he's saying this is not true. He says, like, I have utmost respect for Toyin Lawrence. That's what he's saying, that he fought her as a professional ally. I have never bugged, burgled, or blagged information about her. I don't know if I find that to be true. I don't find reporters who work for the Daily Mail to have that level of integrity, but the case continues, and we'll wait to hear what the findings are. The next story is, again, I'm not going to do wrong and strong. I'll share it with you. This is the one about a Facebook ad, which is part of a campaign that encourages people to intervene safely if they witness sexual harassment or hate crime on the Transport for London network. And in this particular case, it's a campaign, what the complaint is about, a part of a campaign which showed an African male verbally harassing a young girl who's accompanied by a European male friend, and they both sit down next to the girl and they box her in. Now, it's quite an uncomfortable clip, and it's deliberately so. It's supposed to tell you, like, if you see things like this, intervene if you can, but do it safely. But there was a complaint received that the ad was irresponsible, it was harmful and offensive, and that it perpetuated negative stereotypes about teenage African boys. And TfL told the Advertising Standards Authority that both characters were actually intimidating the victim and displayed offensive behavior. It wasn't just the African a teenager in the footage. And the ad was actually one of 3 made for social media, which had been cut from a 2-minute Act Like a Friend film. So it's actually a very cut down section in a longer piece. Now, the ASA said it understood that TfL had intended to present a range of diverse scenarios across their campaign. So there was other people. There's a scene with a European male committing a hate crime against an African woman, and a European male committing a hate crime against another European male. So there's a whole different variations here. But they say, this is the ASA, that they feel that when the ad's seen in isolation, like if you take a bit out, it has the effect of perpetuating this negative racialized stereotype about African men as perpetrators of threatening behavior. And as a result, they've banned the ad. They said that it must not appear in the form complained about. So I think that means it can appear if it's part of the whole thing, but never in that little section. And that's probably a reasonable ruling. And the reason why I kind of hesitated when I started on the story is because, again, I'll say again, we don't do wrong and strong. And this is quite complex because I don't want us to be so sensitive to pretend that African men aren't also responsible for some of these sexual harassment crimes. And, I think, the ASA got kind of the balance right. Don't just show it in isolation, show it with the whole thing. Makes sense. But we've got to be careful here, because what happens is that this is particularly a campaign dealing with violence against women. And, it's very clear to me, and you'll find out as we go through the program, that people of all ethnic backgrounds are involved in the abuse of women. And so, like I said, I'm happy with the ruling the way it is, but I don't want us to be excluded from these campaigns, because all of us have a part to play in actually intervening and stopping and addressing these kind of toxic behaviors when we see them. So I'm going to leave that there. And I say that, and you'll understand why, because let's meet one care assistant, Joshua Springer. He's 36 years of age, and he filmed himself raping elderly care home residents who were suffering for dementia. He's been jailed for 21 years. He was based in the Stamford area of Lincolnshire, and he also attacked a 4th younger victim in North Yorkshire. Now, he pled guilty at a previous hearing to 9 counts of rape and 3 of making indecent photographs of children. He was initially arrested on suspicion of just 1 rape, which happened last summer after a colleague interrupted him as he carried out an attack. Now, one of the things that is quite chilling with this is that, when they searched his phone, they found that he had filmed all 4 victims with his phone. And he kept on making this comment about he was scared of the videos being found and going to jail for a long time. And during the interviews, the police went through his stuff. They found 760 indecent images, including several babies being attacked. Now, he said to the police, "I don't know why I did it, but I did." The judge made a comment that the victims were particularly vulnerable due to their personal circumstances, and this was a gross breach of trust. You specifically targeted vulnerable victims. I don't think 21 years is long enough, but he's admitted it. He's going to jail, and this is why it's, in my mind at least, it's very important that we're mindful about softening down the approach against these people who are a scourge, really, on our society. And this has got nothing to do with his ethnic background. This is just to do with his lack of moral fiber, his character. It's something wrong there, where you're deliberately targeting people in dementia and children. Oof, let me just shudders. Okay, and the final story for this section. So let me have a sip of tea. Throat dry. Okay, we shared this story in the last program, and this was about this poster that was going around. I want to give thanks to Sister J. You know, this went round and to schools, and children were being told to be violent towards each other, and parents were picking up their children as early as possible. Police officers were patrolling outside. And to its credit, the Metropolitan Police actually had dispersal orders. I don't really like the police engaging with our young people, but in this particular case, they seem to have acted in a responsible manner. And if you think that the first post was made almost 2 weeks ago, which declared this war between 8 different schools in Hackney, and that's just days after 2 pupils had been stabbed at Kingsbury High School, what's happened is that there were no instance. The action to kind of disperse the children and to stop anything going wrong actually was quite successful. Now, the reason why this is back on this program is because there's been a new version of this same campaign, and they've included other areas. So it's now spread to Newham, Harrow, Greenwich, and Croydon, just to name a few. Tower Hamlets has also organised their own. And what they're doing, they're listing schools, and they're putting them on the green or the black side. They're giving different colours, and images as red, blue side. And they're trying to organise fights between these young people. So even Ealing has been pitted against Waltham Forest, with 20 points awarded to jugging them and 10 points for banging them. So someone's making it out like it's some kind of game, but it's a very dangerous game. I mean, it's not a game. And so, young people are saying they don't want to take part in these fights. They don't even believe that the posts have been made by students, which is possible that this is just some racists out there, some white supremacists trying to stir things up. We don't know. But again, we're just putting this out there. Please, please, please be careful. Watch out for the safety of your children. Like I said, in Hackney, we were quite fortunate because the police issued a dispersal unit order around McDonald's in Mare Street as soon as the post went viral. And that is one of the spots where young people meet, and they kind of did everything to do to get the pupils back home and keep them safe. But there's no guarantee that this will always hold, especially now that this campaign has spread to other schools. There is someone out there, I say someone or someones, who seem to want to incite violence between young people in different schools. You've probably heard the rhetoric about London being like a horrible, violent place. There are people who are trying to push this image, this message across. And so, yeah, I'm just saying, if you have young people, in your family, friends, just tell them to be careful over the next couple of weeks. And that's it for that section. You are, as ever, watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. I'm hoping if you're watching live, you can interact with our Facebook or YouTube, do all the usual stuff. You can subscribe, like, and share if you find this broadcast useful. But the next section is called Politics, and this is basically looking at issues that have taken place over the past couple of weeks. There's not many stories this particular week, but I'll get on with them. And the first, is it's a bit of a complex one. This is Sheldon Core. He's 47 years of age. He's lived in Britain since he was 16 months old when he arrived with his mother to join his grandparents from Jamaica. Now, he has spent 20 years in prison for stealing £20. And he is now begging the government to halt their plans to deport him, which is going to take place within days, because he fears he faces being homeless in a country he does not know. That, to me, is true, right? If he's been in jail for 20 years and he's lived in the UK since he's 16 months old, that is a harsh, I can't explain it. Now, you might be thinking, well, how has he spent 20 years in prison for stealing £20? That makes no sense, Toyin. You're exaggerating. Well, actually, I wish I was, but no. Sheldon was handed a controversial imprisonment for public protection, IPP is what they call it, jail term in 2005 after he put a man in a headlock and stole it. And this was having already racked up a string of previous convictions when he turned to crime in order to fund his drug addiction. So I'm not going to pretend for one moment that he wasn't involved in some kind of like violent type activities beforehand. He was a drug addict. I saw a newspaper. I read the article where he charged at the police with a knife. He said that he had a gun. He didn't have a gun, but he charged at them with a knife. So he was a violent young man when he was trying to fund his drug addiction. But this policy, the imprisonment for public policy, was driven and championed by then Home Secretary David Blunkett. So this was under Tony Blair's reign, and it was, like I said, it was introduced by the Labour government. It was like a draconian piece of law, and I can't even believe that it was abolished in 2012 by the coalition government. So we had that means that the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats kind of like got rid of it, and that's David Cameron who actually said, and it sounds weird to say this, right? Labour put in this draconian policy. David Blunkett was a horrible right-wing Home Secretary, just like the ones we have now and in the Tory party we have had. But it was actually David Cameron saying, look, this IPP has been overused. It's like, we can't just keep looking at people for indefinitely because, they crossed the road when the lights were red or whatever it was. And so it was abolished in 2012. And it's important to understand that despite originally being handed a minimum tariff of 2 years and 65 days, Sheldon was in prison for 2 decades because even though the scheme had been scrapped, it wasn't done retrospectively. So those who were actually in prison weren't released. Now, he has 5 daughters that he wants to rebuild his life with, who live in Huddersfield. And, the Home Office has just said no. And this is a Labour Home Office. It just said, no, we want to deport you to your country of birth. Now, he is British. He's only known the UK. He's only known Britain. But that's what they want to do. Now, there's an organisation that's trying to support him. I think what they call a campaign group, Unite Group for Reform of IPP. They've supported him in prison, and they said that forcibly removing a man who's lived here since infancy, the government is reviving the colonial practice of shipping undesirable out of sight and out of mind. There's not much more I can say about this. That's the situation. We'll keep an eye on it, and I'm curious about how many other people are in prison on IPPs for doing things like stealing bottles of water. I'm not saying in this case that's what he did. I'm just saying this is something we need to keep an eye at. He also has autism, by the way. And the final story for this section is a short section when it comes to politics. Not that there hasn't been a lot of politics, but just an interesting one is Kerry Badenoch. And I decided not to have an image of her this week. But she's actually accused Reform of playing identity politics. And that's kind of like the kettle calling the pot black. Now, Reform are clearly a racist party, but so are the Conservative Party, which she's leading, and she's part of that. But in this particular instance, she's taking aim at Nigel Farage's party after, Matthew Goodwin, which is its candidate for its failed candidate for Gorton and Denton, suggested that people born from immigrant backgrounds were not in the UK, were not truly British. So even if you're born in the UK, even if you pay taxes, you've lived there all your life, you can never be truly British. And it's just this. We've heard this talk about indigenous Brits, right? I mean, I'm not even going to go through the nonsense of this and the failure of these people to understand history. But his comments were, made in reference to terrorists who were born in the UK, and but you extrapolate this, and she was right. She says it's not for him to decide who is or who isn't British. And I think many people don't know about the sort of views that people like Matt Goodwin hold. Now, we could go on about that, but we know, a Reform party member is racist. This isn't really news. But what is news is that he was soundly thrashed in the recent by-election at Gorton and Denton by the Green Party's candidate, Hannah Spencer, who's now being elected as their new member of Parliament. So if I'm correct, I think the Green Party now has more MPs in House of Parliament than Reform. And even though Reform seem to be on the news, on television every 5 minutes, because of course the establishment loves these racist right wings, kind of like populists. The reality of the situation is that there is a seismic change happening. I don't know if it's going to be sustained, because this is the first time I can remember since being an adult that we have a situation where an election takes place. It's a by-election, and neither of the major parties are in the top two. I mean, and it's quite seismic. So I think the Greens came first, then it was Reform, then it was Labour, and I think the Tory they all lost their deposits. I mean, they just lost their score. Their votes were like a couple of hundred, 700 here and there. It's a major upset. But I'm saying all that, and the image you can see on the screen below this one with Farage and Goodwin is one by a report on The Guardian. And it's something, if you've got time, you might want to check out. And it's really analysing how right-wing rhetoric has risen sharply in UK Parliament. And so it talks about how how it started in the earliest words, and you can see a picture of what's his name, Enoch Powell, talking about aliens. I'll blow it up there. So he's talking about aliens and stuff like this, and then move to illegal immigrants, and then we start talking about deporting them. Then we talk about deterrence and being a civilized society. This language is getting worse and worse and worse. And when I say worse, it's becoming more dehumanizing, as time goes by. So it's something you might want to check out on The Guardian. But that's the last thing for this particular section. Okay, you are watching the Legality Pan-African Community News Update. Again, if you're watching live, you know what to do. Use the chat. I'm assuming that you can hear us okay and see us okay. I'm going to keep going on. This is about UK policing and stuff that's happened over the last couple of weeks. So where do we start? Okay. Yeah. This is Lane Estridge. He died after colliding with a stationary police van. Whenever we get reports like that, it's always unpack the language a bit carefully. Why is this being shown here? Well, what happened is that he was restrained by officers, but they didn't do anything to help him. So they didn't realize he needed medical attention, and so he passed while in their custody. Now, I'm not going to try and editorialize around this. I'll just state the facts. I know them. He was 23 years of age. There was an incident on Back Faulkner Street in Liverpool around 3:15 on Friday, February the 13th. Now, the independent officer of police conduct has said that he was one of two men approached by police in the area. The officer spoke to one while the others followed him, who traveled away from him on an e-bike. So he was trying to get away. 3 officers were on foot. There's a police van. We're positioned at a junction of this street, Back Faulkner Street South and Go Street. And as he approached, the van moved forward and was partly positioned across the junction while the 3 officers approached the e-bike. And then we have this fluffy statement that says that he came off the e-bike and continued forward, colliding with the van, which was not moving at the time of impact. So this is, when I'm hearing language like this, something's not quite right that's going on. It sounds like they did a hard stop. He smashed into it and he flew into the van. So they know they've got culpability in here. But the choice of language is very, very, very specific. Now, they're saying that officers initially restrained him on the ground before identifying he was in need of medical attention and providing first aid. And this is where the issue came up. They say that they found a package in his mouth, which was removed, but he joined the ancestors. He passed away. So I don't have enough information to make sense of this. This is why the IOPC are investigating it. But Kim Johnson, who's the MP for Riversdale, which includes the toxic area, says, look, the community's mistrust of the police is real. It's justified, and it cannot be brushed aside. Now, for far too long, people of African heritage, she says black people, have died following police incidents, and accountability has been almost non-existent. And as Liverpool's first MP, or she says black MP, and chair of the all-party parliamentary groups on miscarriage of justice, I witness every day how our criminal justice system over-polices and underprotects what she calls as black communities. The public deserves to know the full truth, what happened, why it happened, and who is accountable for the death of this young black man. So I tend to agree. I'm not pretending I know all the facts. I'm not pretending he wasn't involved in criminality, but there's something not quite right with the narrative we've been given. It's almost as saying that the van materialized in front of him, and then he just started flying from his e-bike, and that was it. Something else is going on here. The fact that they restrained him before even giving him any medical assistance, there's something not quite right with the story. But we're just reporting it here. The next story, and the final one for this section, is that of a double murderer. And so meet one Carl Cooper. Now, where do I start with this one? Okay, so he murdered these two women, Naomi Hunt and Fiona Hong. One was 41, the other one's 48. Fiona Hong's body has never been found. Now, he was jailed for life. He's 66 years of age. That's done. He's in prison. But what we now know is that there was a call made to the police after he killed the first one. And what happened was that the police just treated the call as a hoax. And this is really worrying, right? Like, both women had been in a relationship with him around a year apart, and both of them had complained to the police about his violence. And so, what do you say? 10 police officers have now been served with disciplinary notice. There's an ongoing investigation into the contact that the force had with both women before their murders. An IOPC spokesperson has said that, the anonymous caller stated Cooper had murdered someone that week. The call was made days before Miss Holmes was reported missing. Now, we don't know where her body is. 10 officers have been served with disciplinary notices. I don't know if they've been suspended. We had to keep our eye out on this one. This happened in 2024. That's when he was jailed. Now, the IOPC director, Amanda Rouse, said that the investigation into police actions following the assault in 2023, that's when he did it, has led to Detective Sergeant and Detective Constable being informed they're being investigated for potential gross misconduct. So we know that there were two high-level officers, a sergeant and a detective sergeant and a detective constable, who are potentially going to face gross misconduct. And I think gross misconduct can lead to dismissal. But for 10 Metropolitan Police officers to have failed to intervene in this situation, I'm not saying, let's be clear, Carl Cooper is the person responsible for the murder of these two women. And he's in jail and he deserves to be in jail for life. But the fact that someone called the police about this particular issue, two women independently, have already told him that he was violent, and they just treat it as a hoax. We need to see justice. We need accountability to this. So this is the kind of nonsense that's taking place in the UK still. Okay, so last for that section. Makes my blood go. Okay, you're watching Legality's Pan-African Community News Update. Again, if you're live, you're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share. What other stuff do you like to do? All that kind of stuff. Let people know if it's useful. Okay, this next section, if you thought those other ones are heavy, this next section is a review of expressions of white supremacy and violent Afrophobia. So we're talking about kinds of racism and stuff in the UK over the last fortnight. I'm going to start off with one which is just so bloody irritating. There's an antiques auction that's selling chains linked to enslaved African people in Zanzibar going on. These neck irons, which you can see in the image, date to the Omani Arab-dominated crime in enslaving people from East Africa, which ended after African resistance and British pressure in the late 19th century. And these are going to go and sell in Scotland. Now, the auctioneer, a person called Marcus Salter, and he's of a company called Cheeky Auctions, said he wanted to ensure history was confronted with the sale of a sensitive artifact they did not wish to offend. And basically, I get it, right? He somehow comes to possession of this. He just wants a payoff. He wants to make money out of this, right? But I think, well, the Labour MP, our sister Belle Ribiera-Addy, who chairs the all-party parliamentary group for African reparations, is right when she says that trading in such items meant that people were continuing to profit from slavery. I mean, she uses the word slave trade, and we've got to stop using the term slave trade, but she's 100% right. Now, these shackles clearly date back to 1780, and they're valued at around £1,000. And they're amongst objects listed in the auction called challenging history. So there is a fetish, right? There are people who like challenging history. They like things like this, bondage. I don't know why they get off on this, and they'll pay good money for this sort of stuff. Now, he said he's selling the chains for a dealer whose father had owned them for 50 years, saying no matter what happens, there's going to be money made out of it from somewhere. But that's not necessarily true. I like the comment made by our sister, Belle. She says that if they were to put them in a museum, I would understand. But buying and selling them like oddities is the same thing that people do when it comes to human remains. You treat them like collector's items, something to be fetishized rather than something that should be looked at in horror. And that is so on point. There's an associate London law firm called Wedlake Bell and Cecilia Dance, who actually gave advice on the restitution of Nazi looted art. She said that it's reached a point in the art trade where if there's any sign an item might have been looted in the Nazi period, no one wants to buy it. They're like, you know what? Nah, we're not going to buy it, because they know the history of it. They're more interested in the justice and giving it back. So she says that, look, it's probably only a matter of time that ethical framework extends to objects associated with enslavement, because you risk commodifying trauma, even if the sale is completely lawful. But, public opinion is definitely turning in favor of restitution, and we can only but hope so. So I don't know if this is going to be so. I don't know if they're going to recognize actually some things you shouldn't make money out of. It reminds me of that play that we had to shut down, the one in the Barbican. What was it called? The Human Zoo one, where they decided that they wanted to teach racism in Azania by putting African people, live African people, chained and naked into museum as museum exhibits, so people can walk around and see them to show what was happening with human zoos. And that was how they were going to teach people, don't be racist. And I remember the only time they got it was when I said, well, hold on, using that logic, we can have an exhibition about child rape or paedophilia, and what we do is that we get children and we put them on plinths naked and say, yeah, this is what they used to do, don't do that anymore, and pay tickets for people to go and see that. We know that's nonsense. It's the same thing with slavery. It's the same thing when we talk about artifacts that fetishize our enslavement. But again, this is like the N word. This is all linked. It's all related to the N word being broadcast while kind of like Nigeria, Sudan, kind of like not just being ignored. Let me move on. A similar story. Not as much information on this one. It's a good news, bad news story. We're still trying to work out where it's going to land. This image or this artifact is something that's been looted by the British Army in the 19th century from the Asante people in modern day Ghana. And the Royal Artillery who holds it are refusing public access to it. Now, just so you have the background, it literally is like the Black Panther film, just like most of the stuff in the British Museum. Again, when you hear about the expedition where they looted, the punitive expedition where they looted artifacts from Benin. In this particular case, it was pillaged by the British Army from the old Royal Palace in the Asante state capital, Kumasi, in 1874. And this is before soldiers set fire to the city and blew up the palace. We often don't realize how frequently the British did this. It wasn't just in Benin. Again, we're here now in Kumasi. Now, the British returned in 1896 and looted the rebuilt palace. And their commander later recalled, "I'd shown the power of England." So this is kind of like, how they kind of like, were bigging up their chests around it. Now, the spoils, as they call them, of the Anglo-Asante Wars, were sold and dispersed amongst private and public collections, including to the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum. And you'll know that in 2024, together, they made a historic decision to return some of these pieces, I think there's around 32 of them, to the Manhia Palace Museum in Ghana, although that was only on a long-term loan. And I think we had a discussion about these people, these institutions, lending us back artifacts they'd stolen. I think we talked about this in the context of the Ethiopian artifacts, which the Victoria and Albert Museum were loaning back to Ethiopia. But this has also happened with these Ghanaian artifacts. Now, the most impressive of the looted objects is arguably the beautifully cast ram's head with its spiraling horns around 19 centimeters in width. So why won't the Royal Artillery allow the public to see it? Well, on one news platform, a former BBC correspondent, Barnaby Phillips, believes that the Royal Artillery may be embarrassed by a stand that was commissioned for the ram's head in 1875, as it depicts 3 African boys in loincloths, as if holding the object aloft, while its base is engraved with the words commemorating the battle and capture of the city. Now, it's difficult to get any response from the military. They're saying that they don't comment on individual cases for security, operational, safety reasons. So they have it, and they're not allowing the public to see it. And so we'll find out more. Perhaps it might not be until the objects are repatriated. I hate this idea of loan, but that's the situation there. The good news, like I said, is that it's going back. The bad news is that we don't know in what state. We don't know what's going on. Are they going to take? Are they going to break off the stand? We don't know what's going on. In what context was it being held and displayed, for what usage? So yeah, that's that story. And this is an interim report that's found that maternity services in England are failing too many families with problems at every stage of the maternity journey. We've covered this over and over and over again. It's good that we have some more data, because there's a new government commission review by Valerie Amos, who you see pictured, and she's found that racism, staffing, and accountability issues were among some of the factors that are causing these problems. Now, so far, 8,000 people have submitted evidence. I think that's something like 400 families. And the report explains that we've heard about stereotypes being used in maternity and neonatal services. This includes accounts of Asian women being stereotyped as princesses, with the implication that they are overly demanding or unable to cope with pain. African women have been described as being deemed as having tough skin and able to tolerate pain. And this is something that we're quite familiar with. Those of us who remember, what's his name? Sims, I think. Is it Sims, the one who's got the statue in New York, who invented or did work on anesthesia and decided to test it on women, without any anesthetic. Well, this is the fact that we're hearing these same kind of stereotypes being used in the UK is quite disgusting. Muslim families have been described as feeling discriminated against on the basis of their religion and feeling unable to raise concerns due to fear that discriminatory attitudes may result in poor treatment for their babies. I can go on and on and on. Structurally, they're saying that services depleted or stopped because of capacity pressures, with stretched antenatal wards and delivery units resulting in delays to admissions, and the use of community midwives in delivery units impacting safety, as well as poor relationships between team members, including obstetricians and midwives. It just goes on and on and on. It's an interim report. We'll have to wait till the final report is concluded, and we'll see what they find and what the recommendations are. But it's good that we're having a look into this. It's always going to be painful to read, even with a drip feed, even though we know some of this stuff, because it just reinscribes that trauma on what's taking place. But 8,000 people have submitted evidence. This is a good start, and let's hope Valerie Amos makes sense of this and comes up with an action plan, as opposed to just telling us what's gone wrong. Okay, the next set of stories are all related. Oh, sorry. My apologies, I almost choked on tea. My bad. Oh, I might just stick to water. It's only peppermint tea. I've not been feeling, anyway. Here we go. Wow, that was scary. Okay, so 4 Premier League players have been subjected to abhorrent racist abuse. And what can I say? Police have been called for social media companies such as Meta, which owns Instagram, to help identify the culprits after the Wolves forward Tolu Awokodare and the Sunderland midfielder Romain Mundell revealed that they'd been sent abusive messages after their matches on Sunday, the 22nd of February. Now, this came after Chelsea's Wellesley Fofana and Burnley's Hannibal Majburi had both reported racist messages that were sent to them on the Saturday. That's 4 players in 1 week. Pure racism coming towards their way. On Monday, Rangers said that 2 of their players, Dejidi Gassama and Emmanuel Fernandez, had received racial abuse on their Instagram accounts after Sunday's draw with Livingston, and that the content would be reported to Meta and would be reported to the police. Now, the Premier League has vowed to assist Wolves and Sunderland's investigations, saying that there would be serious consequences for the guilty parties. However, in sharing images of messages directed to his Instagram account, Fofana made clear he is not convinced that will be the case. He said, 2026 is still the same thing. Nothing changes. These people are never punished. You create big campaigns against racism, but nobody actually does anything. And Mjeri, who earlier shared abusive messages he had shared and brought on his Instagram story, it's 2026 and there are still people like that. Educate yourself and your kids, please. This is an ongoing issue of racism in sports. And I mean, you saw what the head of FIFA is doing with the orange one in the White House. So you can see, I mean, we're not even spoke about the war that's just started with Israel and America and Iran. You see the violence that's taking place. I'm going to keep moving on because we're going to come back to this, unfortunately. Because when I say nothing happens, they're not exaggerating. Do you remember we shared a story about the Man United co-owner, Jim Ratcliffe, who says that the UK had been colonized by immigrants? Well, the FA has decided that he's not going to be charged. They're the governing body. They've given him a reminder of his responsibilities as a participant in English football when taking part in media interviews. However, they said they're not going to be taking any further actions. And they don't think that he's brought the game into disrepute. Now, these comments were widely condemned, even by the Starmerite, the Prime Minister, who I can't even stand, and as well as all of United's leading supporting groups. Now, to his credit, shallow credit, he offered an apology, but it was a qualified apology. It wasn't really one saying that he disagrees with the racism that he shared. He's just saying that he made mistakes in his comments, and he's wrong. He's sorry, if anyone was hurt by those mistakes of what he's saying. Now, the Football and Anti-Discrimination charity Kick It Out said it was disappointed that he had not been given a stronger sanction by the Football Association. They said that when speaking in any capacity, he is still a representative and co-owner of Man United, which has a global following. Unprompted, he brought up the club into a TV interview where he was inaccurate with the facts and divisive with his language. That's Kick It Out. I'm sad that they kind of used that mild language. He just stoked unprompted, for no reason, straight racist rhetoric. He should have been sanctioned, but of course he's got money. They chose not to, and this is why the footballers are saying, these people are leading this charge. They're emboldening the racism that's taking place, not just in the club, but also on the terrace. And I say that because if we look at our next story, again in the same week, Police Scotland is investigating after Rangers players Emmanuel Fernandez and Deji Gassama shared screenshots of racist abuse aimed at them on their social media accounts. Now, this took place on the 22nd, on Sunday, in Livingston. Now, the London-born centre-half Emmanuel Fernandez, who qualifies to play for Nigeria and France under-20, Ketwinger Gassama, who was born in Mauritania, both started for Rangers as their title hopes suffered a blow by being held to a 2-2 draw. Now, Rangers have described the abuse on Instagram that followed as unacceptable and reported it to a social media platform, parent company, Meta. But again, what's happening? The Police Scotland has said, we're aware of the offensive online and we're making inquiries. We're at an early stage, blah, 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 blah. Nothing's happened. So we have to wait to see what's going to happen for this investigation. And I think we know what's going to happen or what's not going to happen as a result of this investigation. This is also now putting Meta in the fold. It's not just the Football Association, it's also Meta as the platform that's enabling this to take place and not addressing it. And then finally, on the same theme, and it's the last story for this section, FIFA has responded to Vinicius Junior Gianluca Prestani racism allegations by announcing plans to introduce measures ahead of the 2026 World Cup to prevent players from covering their mouths when confronting opponents during matches. Now, I just spoke about FIFA's head, the one who's best friends with the orange one. This is an interesting plan. And the whole idea here, I suspect, is that often what's happening on the pitch, they know that racism's taking place. But when they're going to say something like the N-word, they kind of cover their mouth so you can't actually lip read it. And so there's an intent. And so this is something that would help make a difference. It means that if you do that and you get punished for doing that, then it starts to create a culture where it's unacceptable. It means that, to me, that they know they're doing something wrong. But we know that Benfica, forward, Prestiani is being investigated by UEFA, which is another football body, following allegations that he racially abused Real Madrid's Vinicius during the first leg of the Champions League. I say all this stuff, it means nothing to me, all the football stuff. He denies the allegation. He missed the second leg in Madrid after being suspended provisionally for one game by UEFA on prima facie evidence. So it does seem like UEFA kind of said, you know what, let's just be on the safe side. It looks like he did do something. Let's suspend him, from the one game. And the investigation into allegations against a 20-year-old Argentina international has been complicated by him covering his mouth with his shirt when he was communicating with Vinicius Jr. And that's why this rule is looking like it's going to come in. That's why it's being proposed. But during the 140th annual general meeting, the AGM of International Football Board, FIFA's internal Football Association Board and lawmakers, a decision was taken to assess measures to be introduced in time for the World Cup. So we don't know whether this will be in place before the World Cup. I particularly think the World Cup should be cancelled myself. But this is, one result we can keep a look at to see if there's any positive developments. Oh, excuse me. Okay, that's the last one for that section. You are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. You're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter. Subscribe, like, share, blah, 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 if you find it useful. And the next section is going to go over some world news relating to our community over the past 2 weeks. And I say it's related to our community because we're a Pan-African program. Doesn't mean that there's not other things that I'm bursting to talk about, but of course, time. So the first one is we've covered this quite some time. We spoke about Sudan, which is why it's quite annoying that the comments were edited out at the BAFTAs. There's been a report by the Independent International Fact-Finding Mission for the Sudan, and the evidence has established that at least 3 underlying acts of genocide were being committed. And those are killing members of a protected ethnic group, causing serious bodily and mental harm, and deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the group's physical destruction in whole or in part. Now, the scale, coordination, and public endorsement of the operation by the Senior Rapid Support Forces, that's the RSF leadership, demonstrates that the crimes committed in and around Al-Fasher were not random excesses of war. Now, this is coming from the chair of the mission, someone called Mohammed Chander Othman. And he argues that they form part of a planned and organized operation that bears defining characteristics of genocide. Now, I think many of us know that's what's taking place in Sudan and has been taking place in Sudan. The mission described this takeover by RSF as an 18-month siege, which progressively cut off civilians from food, water, medical supplies, and humanitarian assistance. And it says that the siege systematically weakened the target population through starvation, deprivation, trauma, and confinement, leaving many unable to flee when the assault came. Now, the Sudanese conflict erupted on the 15th of April 2023 when fighting broke out between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and their former allies, the paramilitary RSF. And the RSF, for those of you who don't remember, are kind of like this quasi group which is funded try and push back migrants coming to Sudan on their way to Europe. So we are dying and we're being murdered and genocided because Europe doesn't want any more immigrants coming through Sudan on its route to the UK. That's a gross simplification of what's taking place. But that's just something to bear in mind. I'm going to leave that there because it does annoy me even more. The next story is one that we've been talking about in different regions of the continent. This time it's West Africa and in Nigeria. And at least 37 miners had died from carbon monoxide poisoning at a mining site in central Nigeria. Now, the deadly incident, which took place on Wednesday morning in a Kampani community in the Wassa area of Plateau State, also resulted in the hospitalization of 25 people. Now, the government officials who've looked at this have identified the location as a dormant lead mine where accumulated minerals had released lethal fumes. Many people have fared dead without providing an exact figure, adding that others are receiving treatment in nearby hospitals. Now, what's happened is that local villagers, unaware of the toxic nature of the emissions, reportedly entered a tunnel to extract minerals and inhaled the gas. It's important to understand that illegal mining remains a widespread concern in Nigeria, where extractive operations frequently lack both government oversight and basic safety protocols. The federal government in Nigeria has ordered an immediate suspension of all mining activities in the area near the accident to allow for a comprehensive investigation. But this is not the first. There's been similar accidents that have killed miners in Nigeria. At least 18 were killed last year in the Zamfara state in the northwest of the country after a boulder crushed onto an illegal mine during heavy rains. And this loss of life, which is happening, where we're seeing people risking everything just to kind of like extract minerals from the soil so they can sell it to make a living, is widespread across the continent. And it's not just young men, as we're seeing in this particular case. It's also children. It's also women. It's also it's everyone that's involved in this. And it's a horrible story. And we don't hear anything about this in the Western media. And then we have this ridiculous story where a report has been leaked, and we now know that the US aims to process at least 4,500 refugee applications from European South Africans per month, which is far above what Trump's stated refugee program cap is. I could talk about this for ages, and I don't particularly want to. Trump has said the US would only admit 7,500 total refugees from around the world in the fiscal year 2026, but he's changed this to accommodate these European Boers or European Afrikaners as refugees, saying that they've been violently persecuted in Tanzania, which is the traditional name for South Africa. The government, of course, is saying this is nonsense. There is no genocide against European Afrikaners. It's just a madness. But hey, this is the orange one in the White House, just stoking up as much toxicity in the world as he possibly can. And I think, no, it's not the last one for the story, almost there. The Archbishop of the Church in the province of the West Indies, the most Reverend Philip Wright? I don't use honorifics. So Philip Wright has backed initiatives to provide reparations for the historic enslavement of African people. Now, he's praised the Church of England's Project SPY initiative, which seeks reparative justice rather than symbolic regret, to address the fact that the Church Commissioner's endowment, which is now worth billions, is rooted in the Queen Anne's bounty. And this is a fund that historically invested in the South Seas Company, which transported enslaved people. Now, despite parliamentary criticism, Wright told an international meeting of 40 Anglican leaders in 31 countries that the Anglican Church's credibility in witnessing to the gospel is at risk if it refuses to move from symbolic apology to reparative justice. He spoke at Breaking the Chains of Injustice, an event organized by the USPG, examining the effects of colonialism on indigenous people. And he reportedly said the legacy of slavery places the Anglican Church at a significant moral crossroads. The recognition of the complicity of the Church in the transatlantic slave trade opens the door to the possibility of transformation. However, if we're not careful, Words can become empty rhetoric, which leads to false hope, the end state of which can be worse than the original. It's good to hear someone, from the church, kind of like making sense as they speak on this particular issue. What else can I say? At least 55 Ghanaians have been killed fighting the war in Ukraine. Why? Well, now basically we know that, like I said, 55 have been killed. There are 2 others held as prisoners of war. On a trip to Kiev, Samuel Ogzetso Ablakwa said that around 270 Ghanaians are believed to have been lured into the conflict since 2022. He cites Ukrainian authorities on this. He described the figures as depressing and frightening, and says that Ghana can't turn a blind eye to these heartbreaking statistics. Now, he didn't say whose side the Ghanaians have been fighting on, but Ukraine's foreign minister said on Wednesday that more than 1,700 people from 36 countries in Africa had been recruited to fight for Russia. The 55 Ghanaians is the highest number of casualties from a single African country to have been officially confirmed in the Ukraine-Russia war. We know it's other nations because local media in Cameroon have reported that 94 of its locals, or its nationals, had died in the conflict, but the authorities have not yet commented on these figures. We also have 2 Africans from Tanzania and at least 1 Kenyan who have died in the conflict. So, it's a very strange picture that's taking place here, where we're seeing Africans leaving the continent to fight for either Russia or Ukraine and losing their lives in someone else's war. There's last week a Kenyan national called Fetus Arasa Onwamba was charged over accusations he had lured young men to Russia with job opportunities only for them to end up fighting in Ukraine. He denied the charges. And a total of 1,000 Kenyans have been recruited to fight for Russia in its 4-year war against Ukraine, to the report from Kenya's National Intelligence Service. This is ongoing. When we asked Russia, kind of like, what's the situation? Its embassy in Kenya has denied these accusations that it was involved in recruiting people to fight in the war. But it did say that Russian law allowed foreign nationals who are legally in the country to voluntarily enlist in the armed forces. So it's difficult to know what's happening. Is it that those Africans who are in Russia are enlisting? Or is it that Africans from the continent, which is what we're seeing in Kenya, are leaving the motherland to go and fight in these wars? What can I say? And then the final story for this section is one that France has handed over a talking drum which was looted by colonial troops from Ivory Coast in 1916 in the latest repatriation of stolen artifacts. I should have moved this into the next section, actually. The drum, which is more than 3 meters long and weighs around 430 kilos, was used by the Ebri community to transmit messages. And it's one of hundreds of objects France is preparing to send back to Africa, with the effort set to be accelerated by the passing of a new law to authorize mass repatriations. Now, all of Ivory Coast is ready to welcome it. The Ivory Coast Culture Minister, Francois Remrek, said that she was extremely moved by the return of the symbol that is finally coming back to its homeland. And it's going to be exhibited permanently in a new museum being built in Ivory Coast's commercial capital, Abidjan. Now, France has been flooded with restitution demands from former colonies, such as, I don't like saying former colonies, former regions that were colonized by the French, such as Algeria, Mali, and Benin. Its national museums hold tens of thousands of artworks and other prized artifacts that were seized or purchased during the colonial era. And European nations are slowly moving to return a limited number of looted artifacts in a bid to build bridges from the nations they formerly colonized. Now, I say all of this, I think it's also very important to recognize that this activity and this interest follows French military withdrawal of troops from African countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and the Central African Republic, as well as Chad, after a group of like Pan-Africanists, not completely noble Pan-Africanists, but Pan-Africanists nonetheless, like Ibrahim Traore and others, seized power in the 2022 coup d'etat And I'm not, when I say they're not completely noble, I'm not suggesting that I don't like the fact that this independence is happening, but I'm just saying we have to be mindful about what the replacement will be. Okay, that's the end of that section. This is the final section. So if you've got any comments, it's been quite quiet today. I hope it's all going out fine. We've only got a few slides in this section. You are watching Legali's Pan-African Community News Update. Welcome to interact with us. Sister Oleander's on the chat. Subscribe, like, share, blah, 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 if you find it useful. And there's a couple of positive news stories relating to our community over the past couple of weeks. That story should have been in this section. Nonetheless, here we are. Yeah, let me move on. Sister Oleander. Okay, let me go back.
Yeah, just two short comments. One from Perry saying, "Big up, brother. You sound unwell, but thanks for soldiering on."
Oh, thank you. I am tired.
Yeah, and Mr. the 4-3. Good evening, Dr. Toyin. Glad to see you streaming, and I also wanted to let you know it will be my birthday tomorrow.
Oh, happy Earth Day. Giving that to you in advance.
Earth Day.
Also to one of our researchers, Sister Angie, as well. So belated happy birthday as well to you.
Oh, happy belated birthday, Sister Ange.
Yeah. So, and thank you both for sharing that. And I'm going to rest for the rest of the evening after the program. So thank you for noticing that. But it's work compared to what many of our people have to do. This is nothing compared to the struggles some of our people are going through right now. So I'll soldier on. Okay, so the first story for this section, being positive, is one of William Kabawaka's extraordinary story, which has been told many times. I think it's been done it was a book, then it's a film. It's now going to be told in the form of a play. And it's really about this remarkable feat of resourcefulness, like this child's intelligence and great against the odds narrative art coming together to a Malarian boy living through a climate of floods and drought that left his village facing famine, and he builds a wind turbine out of scraps. And as a 13-year-old, he becomes this almost legendary figure for saving the life of his community. Now, his memoirs about this was made into a film by Chitwa Ejiofor, along with the much viewed and celebrated TED Talk by Cam Kwamba. But this is a musical version of the story with its own distinct vibe, directed by Lynette Linton. It's said to be an exuberant creation filled with warm light, humor, a gorgeous grass-roofed set design, as well as vivid costumes. And so if you want to check this out when it comes around to where you are, you're welcome to do so. This is just an award that's been given to our elder, Elfie Morton. Now, she was born on the Caribbean island of Nevis before arriving in the UK as a 23-year-old nurse in 1958. And throughout her life, she has been a champion for the African community in Leicester, especially following racial tension in the city, and she founded the Leicester Caribbean Carnival. And so Leicester Council has actually awarded her with an honour for basically hosting this first carnival, which was in August 1985, and for the many years recognising it was the largest UK African Caribbean carnival outside London. So well done, our sister and elder. The next story is about an event that's taking place, organised by the Windrush Foundation and Equiano Society. It'll be at the Black Cultural Archives on 8th of March. That's next Sunday from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And it's just a unique event to remember the life of Milton Walker and other World War I soldiers. You can hear David Glee's presentation on several of them who are buried in the Commonwealth War Grave Cemetery in Seaford. They were members of the British West Indies Regiment who came from various parts of the Caribbean. I dislike saying that he came to serve king and country. That's the text that we have here. But they made a contribution, and that contribution feeds into where we are now and some of the gains we have now. So contributors will include Roxanne Gleave, Alexander the Great, and Arthur Torrington. That's next Sunday. And I think this is the final one. I didn't get enough time to get much information on this. There is a play called Crown of Blood, which relocates Macbeth to 19th century Yorubaland. And as the title suggests, it's based on Akira Kurosawa's 1957 film Throne of Blood. I think that's been a massive influence on many creatives. I think even Tarantino plagiarized it for one of his films. And that was one of the major influences. But it's been put together by the playwright Oladipo Abulawaje for Utopia Theatre. Now, many of you will know that I'm a great fan of Oladipo's work. There's a few playwrights and theatre directors that I have a lot of time for and respect. This is coming out at the Crucible Theatre in Sheffield, but then it will be touring until the 6th of March. So hopefully it will reach London, at which point I can go and see it, because I'm long overdue some cultural delights. But yeah, I think that's it. And that's the last one. So thank you for bearing with us. I don't know if there's any more comments, Sister Oleander, if there's anything there. If not, then I'm going to sign off. I'm going to say thank you, Sister Angie, Brother Colin, Sister Amma, for your research, and others who sent stories to us. Sister Oleander.
No. There was a comment earlier, but I'm not sure what it was regarding. Saying it makes that incident normalized on the world stage. I think this must have been something about. Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, because I missed it. It was. I think it may have.
Well, thank you for sharing the comment.
I think it may have been about the football and about the or the comment, the N-word being said.
Okay.
In the show, yeah.
Without knowing which minutes
I'm not sure. But anyway, yeah. Thank you for the comment. And yeah, just to say thank you everybody for joining us, and we really look forward to seeing you again next time. Take care, and sign off from me.
Yeah, and our next broadcast is on the 15th of March, 6 p.m. Sorry, it was a little bit late this week. As ever, don't agonize, organize is the phrase, and be careful. I don't want to say about this. I don't want to spend a lot of time. The world's become a very, very dangerous place. It always has been, but it's, you need to always remember now that ideas like the rule of law, international rules, international law, rules-based order, all this stuff are just myths. They don't exist. Powerful people do exactly what powerful people want to do. They will sacrifice some of their own. So the Prince Andrews and the what's his name? I forgot Mandelsons of the world. And they'll sacrifice, their low tier ones.
Remember, it's not Prince Andrew anymore.
Well, actually, I remember reading something which was really a good point. Someone said that they're going to still keep using the word prince because they don't feel that the royal family should be able to separate themselves from his crimes. And when we just move it to Windsor or whatever it is, and what happens is kind of like they've divorced themselves from the problem. And the problem is, or the reality is, that they are part of the problem.
Sure.
So I'm calling him prince because he was a monarch, so he was part of the monarchy when he committed his crimes. And it was the monarchy and being a part of that system that enabled him to hide and do it for so long. So it's all very well for them to separate him now, but yeah, he was Prince Andrew. So I don't even call King Charles. But in this particular case, I will happily say it was Prince Andrew because it was the House of Windsor that continued this atrocity. It's the House of Windsor that still has a grip on our people's necks on the continent and in the Caribbean. It's the House of Windsor that kind of like sanctioned off some of the worst atrocities that are going off in the world. So yeah, but please,
No, I
everyone.
think you're right. I think that's a really good point, actually. He committed these crimes whilst he was a prince. So,
Yeah, it was part of the monarchy.
yeah.
So they're all tainted with it, and let them own it. I mean, I think the Harry one, he did the smart thing. He was, there was an ethical center. I don't want to be part of that institution, and he separated himself from it. And I have so much respect for that. So let them get the name of shame. Let them, and all the people who end up with honors or so-called honors after kneeling down before these rotten people, let them own that kind of like. Anyway, let me leave it there. My throat's going. Be careful. Be safe. Take time to separate from watching and consuming this news 24/7, because the world is becoming much more dangerous, and we need to protect our well-being. And as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.